Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, their craft and more. And joining me from across the pond for this episode is fiction author Stephen Eoannou. Stephen, hello and welcome back again on the show.
You can't get rid of me.
Nope, and I'm glad. I'm really glad because I really want to talk about your book. And thank you again for being so very accommodating, dear listeners. It's the third time we're trying this because technology let me down 2 times already, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that it will work out this time.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. It's an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And like I said, your splendid book with the title After Pearl, which came out in May 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Still fresh from the press. And like last time, I have to say, there is more than one meaning to this title. And I will ask you right now, what can you tell us about After Pearl?
Yeah, titles are funny with me. It's the only really quirky thing that I have as a writer. I don't light candles or have special music or any of that stuff, to write. But one quirky thing I do is I have to have a title even before I write that first sentence. And the title can change over the course of time. But I have to name my children, I guess. And I like titles with multiple meanings. My first novel, Rook, was about a bank robber who was an avid chess player, and the title of that novel is called Rook. And Rook has 2 meanings. One, the chess piece that people are familiar with, but also the slang term, to cheat or to fool, to rook somebody. And that person rooked his wife. She never knew he was a bank robber. And with After Pearl, I think the first title I had only briefly was Buffalo Noir, because it's set here in Buffalo, New York. And I quickly changed it to After Pearl because the setting is in 1942 after Pearl Harbor. That's the obvious meaning. And then later on, we find out that there's a portrait, an oil painting of a lovely black woman, and the name of that painting is After Pearl. Well, actually, it's not of her. It is a different painting, but it's called After Pearl. And so the meanings kind of work together.
And the protagonist, the hero of the story, is Nicky the Weasel Bishop, a private eye with a very determined assistant.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite characters, Chia. She's absolutely splendid. But but his character isn't an easy one. I mean, he isn't the easiest person to handle. She does it splendidly. She takes no shit from him. We're allowed to see shit on this show.
Yeah, you're right on all accounts. Nicholas Bishop has a lot of issues. He has a lot of problems. He is an alcoholic, and he is trying to recover. On top of that, he has some abandonment issues, and then on top of that, he has a physical ailment. He was hit by a taxi, and he may or may not have stepped in front of it on purpose to stay out of the draft for World War II, but it has left his foot deformed, and he walks with a limp and a cane. And then probably most of all, and that's why his nickname's Nicky the Weasel, is he's kind of a weaselly character. He doesn't have much of a moral compass. And so he's got a lot of challenges. He's not the typical private eye that you're used to in the noir world. And neither is Gia. Gia is his former secretary at the start of the novel. But she is not one to just sit back and get coffee and answer the phones like in so many of the classic mystery novels. She wants to be a private eye herself, and she gets the job because she answered an ad for a secretary position. She got there before the agency opened, picked the lock, and was seated at the desk typing away. When Bishop showed up for work that day, and he hired her immediately. But it's been her dream to get out in the field and be a private eye. And with this novel, she gets that chance.
Mm. And I asked you the last time about the female private eyes. I mean, were there any at the time? We are talking about the year 1942, like you said, the
Yeah.
40s, Second World War, sorry, and not even in the police force, I suppose, were that many women.
No, Gia is like 30 years ahead of her time, and I wrote her specifically to be that.
Mhm.
And as far as the number of private eyes, I couldn't find out how many were in New York State in 1942,
Mhm.
but I did find out in Washington State there was only three in the entire state. So I'm assuming, just a handful in New York as well, and certainly in Buffalo, I couldn't find any. So a part of and it's ongoing in this book and in the second book, because this is a series. Male characters' reaction when they find out that she is a private eye and a
Mm.
working detective. They're shocked by this. Um, they never had heard of such a thing. They didn't think it was possible. And so that gives her plenty of opportunity in this book and in future books to have kind of a smart ass response to that very narrow view that men have.
Absolutely, I would absolutely agree. The fact that probably men would underestimate her.
Hmm.
Uh,
Absolutely.
and it's very an unladylike profession, I would say. Uh,
It is, and she's first generation Italian.
yeah,
So her mother and her grandparents, um, who she lives with, they can't understand, what she's doing. Why is she hanging out with Bishop? She's coming and going at all times of the
yeah,
day. What is going on
yeah.
here? And Gia is more American than old world Italy. And she wants it. She wants to be like the detectives that she read about in novels, the Chandler and Hammett and all the classics, as well as the movies that she watched. The Thin Man, all
Mm,
those great
mhm,
movies from the 30s and early 40s. She's hooked. She wants to be like those guys.
mm. I mean, the good Catholic Italian girl, not not the job for her.
Not running around with a 38 in her purse.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
everyone loves Gia. I have to say that, which I'm delighted, because Bishop is so unlikable in the beginning of the book, and
true.
hopefully, I love one of the reviews I received was, I really didn't like Bishop, but I was rooting for him by the end of the book, and I love when I read that, and hopefully the readers think that. But everybody says they love Gia from the first time she enters the scene. And I know my publisher and my editor, every time I turned in a revision for this book and the next book that's coming out in 2027, they always say, more Gia, put her in this scene. How come she's not in that scene? Everybody wants Gia.
Yep, yep. So do I. I admit it. And I also agree with what one of the reviews said. You just mentioned Bishop isn't very likable in the beginning.
No,
I'm afraid.
no, and it was a risk on my part, having such an unlikable character. But you don't have to like the characters, but you have to find them interesting enough to
Yep,
keep turning the pages.
yep.
And I was hoping people would keep turning the pages until Bishop turned a little bit, and you can see him struggling with his recovery and struggling to be a
Mm.
better person and struggling to keep Gia, who he's been secretly in love with since that day that she broke into his office. And so I hope people stick with the bishop in the beginning to see how he does change or attempts to change. Um,
I would say so, because I did, and like you said, he does change at the end of the book. He becomes likable because you learn more about him, where he came from, the person he really is. When you look at him as a character, how he, for example, treats this veteran he knows from the First World War. He treats him with respect and kindness. So he is capable of these actions. We maybe underestimate him. I mean, his problem with the alcohol, like I said last time when we spoke, I mean, if he would sit down next to me on the bus, I probably would have to get up and leave,
Yeah,
But
but he does. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? A character has to grow and change over the course of the
yeah,
novel, and we see that in Bishop. We at
yeah,
least seen him try to get
yeah,
back to the person he was before the
yeah.
alcohol took over. And I'm glad that you mentioned, his backstory, because a lot of times when you read and reread those classic noir novels,
Mhm.
they don't have a backstory. The
Yeah,
detectives, their job, especially I'm thinking of the Continental Op, Dashiell Hammett's first detective before he came out with Sam Spade. Again, it was just about the job, and that's all
yeah.
you knew about him. And I wanted to give him a backstory and make him a more rounded, fuller, more believable character. So hopefully people would say, yeah, he's kind of interesting. And I think his sense of humor
Mm-hmm.
makes him likable. And as you
Mm-hmm.
said, the way he treats Benny the Junk Man, the World War One vet, his friend Ira, even his little one-eyed dog that somehow he gets possession of. That he thinks he might have stolen it because he can't remember because of his blackout.
Yeah,
He's kind to the dog and the people on the margins of
yeah,
society, and he's on the margins of society.
yeah. The underdog.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You said the plot and the characters. Do you think that in the classic noir uh, novels, plot was more interesting or more important than characters, because a three-dimensional character might not have been that important to the authors, unlike the plot itself, the whodunit.
Yeah, that's a good question. But plots are so important to the mysteries, to writing mysteries, right? And having that big reveal at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So plot's important. But then you think of all those classic detectives, those classic
Mm-hmm.
characters that stay with us 80, 70, 60 years later, the Sam Spades, the Mike Hammers, they are still with us. They're still making movies about them. There was
Yep.
Spencer Confidential came out a few years ago. There's Monsieur Spade that came out,
Mm-hmm.
streaming. Kind of the after story to the Maltese Falcon. So those characters, even though they were limited in their depth and backstory, they stay with us, and they're part of the detective culture, and I
Mm-hmm.
think they always will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's interesting, isn't it, to realize that so long ago, and we talk about them, like you said, nowadays we are more interested in the three-dimensional character, the backstory. They didn't have
Yeah,
one back then. Yet at
yeah,
the same time, we don't want to get rid of them. It's not as that we
yeah,
can't get rid of them. We don't want to get rid of them because
right.
maybe, do you think we want to solve the riddle they they are?
Maybe it's just that they're just so well done, and so well drawn, even if they're not a lot of depth to them.
Mm,
You think of them as the classic
mm,
detective, and even Monsieur Spade that I mentioned, that
yep,
attempts to give a backstory, right, or
yep, yeah,
the
yeah,
actor story about what happened with Spade and O'Shaughnessy, who he ends up getting back to. Well, I don't want to be a spoiler, but if you haven't seen the show, who he gets back with after she
yeah,
gets out of prison,
yeah,
because there's that great scene when she's taken away, and in the
yeah,
movie you see the old gate of the elevator being drawn across like she's already behind bars. Great, just great stuff.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, they're lingering characters that have captured our imagination for one way or another, one way reason or another, and they certainly captured my imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to kind of write a homage to them
Mm-hmm.
with Bishop,
Mm-hmm.
but make it different, make him
Mm-hmm.
more complex, make him more troubled, make him less hard boiled than they are. G is
Mm-hmm.
the hard boiled one. If you think about it, she's ready. She wants that gun and she wants to use it.
Yep.
You know, so she's kind of the tougher one of the pair, and she's also the moral compass of the
Mm-hmm.
pair. And I think they make an interesting tandem that I don't think that you have seen in classic noir.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you just said, that Chia is mm, the harder character,
Yeah.
for sure. She's not as soft-hearted as Bishop,
Hmm.
although she's a woman.
But
Maybe
you
that's
think
why.
about it, right?
Maybe yeah. Maybe that's why you underestimate us as women. Well, I
Yeah, I
don't know.
mean, if you think about it, she has to be like that in the
Yeah,
world that she wants to
yeah,
live in and make her living in.
yeah.
Um, she doesn't want to stay at home and
No,
be a housewife. She doesn't want to work in a
no.
defense factory. She wants to be a private eye, and it's a tough racket, as
Yeah.
Bishop says, especially for being a pioneer, which
Mm-hmm.
she really is.
And may I ask, Stephen, what was the reason, or how did you decide for this year, 1942? I mean, you could have said it in the 30s. You could have said it after the Second World War. Why exactly this year, shortly after Pearl Harbor happened? Was there a certain event that was resonating with you? Why this year?
I love. Yeah, well, first, I think my parents, they grew up in the 30s and the 40s, and I grew up listening to their stories and reading their books and watching their movies and listening to their music. That's my favorite period, the 30s and the 40s. And my mother, she's passed, but she used to say, "You romanticize," and that was a dark time, it was an awful time. And she's right. I am romanticizing it. Why 1942? I love movies and I love shows that are set in that period, but not necessarily, movies or books about the war or battles itself, but more of the human stories of the people at the home front who are struggling with everything that's going on. Those are the books and the movies that attract me. So I knew I wanted to set it at the home front. Um, and I knew that um, I wanted Bishop's injury to have this kind of lingering mystery of whether he did or did not step in front of that cab on purpose. And um, it had to be after Pearl Harbor, obviously, because that's when America got involved in the war. So I knew it had to be um, after December 7th, 1941, and this takes place the summer of 1942. So I think just working the timeline kind of backwards is how I came up with 1942. And the idea is, this is the first in the series, that this series hopefully will last at least through the war years.
Okay, yeah, understandable. Yeah, makes absolute sense. And may I also ask, because there is so much going on in your book, which Bishop discovers bit by bit. I mean, we have the mob, we have those crooked politicians. Are they the
Yeah.
same? One wonders. No, that's just me. Sorry about that. We have this right-wing American Nazis. Right-wing and
Hmm.
Nazis is the same. Okay, we have American Nazis. There
Yep.
is so much going on. And what about the exact, or maybe the real historic background of that time? The picture you painted with all those elements in your story. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. one of the nice things about writing historical fiction is you can address modern day issues, but more indirectly or more softly by placing it in historical perspective. So what we've seen, unfortunately, here in America is, the rise of fascism and right wing politics, and Nazis marching in the streets, and so that was one of the things I was trying to do, saying, "Hey, look, this is not right. What are we doing? Where are we going here as a country and as a nation?" So I started doing some research. All my books are based in my hometown of Buffalo, New York, and I stumbled across some interesting things. One of them was, and it's in the book, there was a pretty significant presence of the Ku Klux Klan here in Buffalo, New York. And they did publish a directory of Klansmen. And it wasn't like the old phone books where it was alphabetical order. They published it by profession. So if you wanted to get your, a haircut, or if you needed a dentist, and you were a Klans person, you would look in this directory to see who was a fellow Klansman and patronize them. And it was, I think, 600 names were in this directory. And somehow it was stolen or was leaked. And um, and this is in the book. The police put it on display. They ran it in the newspaper. They outed the Klansmen. They removed the hoods of them, and so now you knew who those neighbors were that were part of the Klan. So I thought that was really fascinating. And I read that, and then I read that the American Bund, the American Nazi Party of the 30s, had some of its origins here in Buffalo, New York. I thought that was very interesting. And it's really not much of a stretch of the imagination if you were a Klansman in the 20s and early 30s to be part of this American Nazi movement in Buffalo in the late 30s and early 40s. So that's where that idea came from. So that part is historically accurate. The directory is historically accurate. And I just thought that was a fascinating dark part of my city's history that I didn't know about until I started doing research for the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. I didn't know that the KKK started, or this American Bund started in Buffalo. Interesting part, tidbit.
Yeah, it had a strong presence here in Buffalo, and then in downstate New York, there used to be summer camps for Nazi children. There was a big rally in Madison Square Garden, which Lindbergh addressed the crowd. So it was and then of course when the war started, it all fell apart, and um, people went to prison, I think for embezzlement or something, but it
Okay.
kind of went off the headlines and became much more secretive and
Okay.
off the radar, I guess.
Okay. Okay. Where did I asked you before, because we know that there were camps for the Japanese in the United States during World War II. There were camps for the Germans during World War I. What about World War II?
World War II, like you said, the Japanese, were certainly interned. FDR is my favorite president,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a dark part of his administration when he
Mm-hmm.
ordered the internment of the Japanese
Mm-hmm.
Americans. Early on in the war, and I almost started writing about this, and I didn't get to it. The enemy aliens. So the Italians. They had cameras and radios confiscated. They had to
Mm-hmm.
move away. They weren't interned, but they had to move away from um, certain military facilities,
Mm-hmm.
ports, etc. They certainly
Okay.
for a lot of the discrimination and the
Mm-hmm.
fear
Okay.
that was around at the time. And the same thing with the Germans. I don't think it
Mm-hmm.
was as bad as World War One,
Okay.
but it was still certainly there. That's not directly expressed um, in the book itself,
Mm-hmm.
but it was certainly part of the times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Because when you think of that time coming, I mean, not many people know that Adolf Hitler was voted Man of the Year by the Times magazine in
Time
1938.
magazine. Yeah, yeah.
This is,
So yeah, I mean, just you look back at history, and there's just those things that through a 90-year-old lens now, you just see how
yeah.
unbelievable some of this was. And again, I'm doing more research now for hopefully the third Bishop novel, and
Okay.
it's just stumbling across things that um, I guess shouldn't shock me, but it still does. And for a writer of historical fiction,
Yeah.
they're great details to put in, and there's no comment needed by the author or a reaction by
No.
the character because the readers know the history, hopefully, and they're taken aback by some of this.
Yeah, that's another thing. Now that you mentioned research, that's another thing that always is interesting when authors talk about it. Also for other authors, how much shall, should, can you put into your novel, and how much do you have to leave out because you do not want
Yeah,
to explain every little detail, because if it's not for the plot, if it's not furthering the plot, why
yeah,
put it in? But some
right.
things you've learned more, you've researched more, you know more than you can put in. How do you tackle this challenge?
Yeah, so the previous novel before After Pearl is called Yesteryear, and it's based on the real true story of a man named Franz Stryker who created the Lone Ranger and the Green Hornet. And you may not know his name because he sold the rights to the Lone Ranger for $10 before the Lone Ranger exploded into this 90-year franchise. I did a lot of research for that book because I had to research Fran's life. I had to research the early days of radio. I had to research the Depression. Um, and I was very lucky in that when Fran passed away in the early 1960s, his estate donated all his papers to the University of Buffalo. Um, and they have, I don't know, 15, 20 cartons of old radio plays and letters and telegrams and Lone Ranger memorabilia and scripts. And I would go online and say, Tuesday morning, I'd like to come in at 10 o'clock and review the contents of cartons 4 and 5. And I would get to the library at the University of Buffalo at 10 in the morning, and they'd be waiting for me, and I would sign them out, and I'd put on my gloves and just go through this great treasure trove of information. Um, I never set a time limit. Like I'm going to research this book from January through March and then start writing April 1st. I just read enough and took notes enough and researched enough until I felt, and this is a weird way of expressing it, until I felt full, until I felt like I had enough to start writing a draft. Um, and I would go and I would start writing at that point, and then I would have to fact check or go back and research some, but majority of the work had been done up front. And you're absolutely right. Um, if you see something that is in your novel, in your manuscript, that's not furthering, pushing the plot forward or revealing information about the characters, it has to be cut no matter how much you love that passage, no matter how well you thought you wrote it. Someone said you have to kill your darlings. And that's what you have to do. You have to be kind of cold blooded when you're going through the editing process of it. So all the information that didn't make it in, it's not missed, but it helped me as the author know the characters, know the times, and hopefully I was smart enough to cut out those parts that weren't needed. And I'm very blessed to have worked with the same editor for 3 books now, Adam L. Sergene, at SFWP, and when I'm not smart enough to catch, he does, and he makes me cut it out.
Okay. Yeah, editing and good editors are very important for
And
a novel.
I feel
Absolutely.
blessed that I have Adam.
Yeah. And it also helps, doesn't it, when you have researched, when you know all these things which you do not necessarily put into the novel, but it helps you set the scene,
Yeah.
make it authentic,
Hmm.
and paint the picture for the reader.
Yeah, it has that right feel,
Yeah.
because so much of writing really is, does this feel right? Does this
Yeah.
sound right? And if you know what you're writing about,
Yeah.
even if I go back to yesterday, even if I don't describe the radio station thoroughly,
Yeah.
because it's not needed, at least
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
I can picture it in my head while I'm
Yeah.
writing it.
Hmm. A picture in your head, is that also how it works for you when you write? Because I often wonder, are you the visual type, meaning that you have to see your scene before you can put it on paper? Are you that kind of writer, or do you not need it in those details?
Well, not when I'm in front of the keyboard,
Okay.
but when I'm walking the dog, when I'm doing stuff around the house,
Hmm.
I'm daydreaming. I'm daydreaming those
Okay.
scenes. I ran into one writer at a workshop I ran a few months ago, and he says he literally dreams his scenes. And I go,
Okay.
man, I wish I had that. I wish your muse would visit me when I'm dreaming, because that doesn't happen to me. But I'm usually daydream the scene
Hmm.
before I write it. And then when I'm at the keyboard, it's not so much visual, it's more audio. And what
Okay.
I mean by that is I am speaking aloud as I am typing what I am typing. So I'll write,
Okay.
um, the fox jumped over the fence. No, no, that's not good. The quick
Okay.
fox jumped over the fence. No, that's not right. The quick brown fox. Okay, that's good. That's a keeper. I'll keep that line.
Okay.
And so I am reading aloud. I am talking to myself.
Hmm.
It's, if I ever set up a camera, I'm sure I look and sound ridiculous. But it's usually 5 in the morning, and I'm the only one around except for my one-eyed dog,
Hmm.
and she's part deaf now, so she doesn't care. But I had always read aloud when I was doing the editing process.
Hmm.
And I think I began with Rook, my first novel, about a bank robber, that I began speaking as I was writing.
Hmm.
So that's been fairly recent that I've done this. And I think it makes a world of difference. Because it's like hitting a wrong note on piano. You
Yeah.
can
Yeah. Yeah.
hear it.
Yeah.
You can hear that bad note, and you say, "Oh, that's not the right word," or "Oh, that's," if you're tripping over your own sentence, there's
Hmm.
something wrong with that sentence.
Yep.
And hearing it helps me. It helps
Hmm.
me polish those sentences up.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something other authors have said when they are finished or when they are reading through a chapter, they read it out loud,
Hmm.
just the same as you. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't sound right, you have to go over it again.
Yeah, and I have one friend who's a writer who uses the computer to read it back to her. Um,
Ah,
I
okay.
tried that, and maybe I should try it again because the voices have improved, but I couldn't get past that robotic computer
Okay.
voice.
Yeah.
So everything sounded weird to me.
Okay.
So I just rely on my own voice to hear
Mm-hmm.
it.
Okay. And may I ask, coming back to your characters, where did you find them? I mean, where did you find Chia? We said she's one of the favorites of the people, but also where did you find Bishop? He's an unusual character. We mentioned it before at the beginning of our conversation, but where did, how did you meet them?
So Norman Mailer wrote a book called "Writing is a Spooky Art." Um, and because spooky things happen, you don't know where this character came from, or you read something and you don't remember writing that sentence, or you get an idea and it just seems to come out of anywhere. And he said it's spooky, the way writing works. And with Bishop, I was sitting in a bar daydreaming, eavesdropping on conversations, studying people by myself, drinking Four Roses bourbon. And I was mad because I had seen a movie the night before with a one-dimensional detective. And I was still mad the next day. I said, I'm so tired of these. I want to write somebody different. And then here's the spooky part. I thought of a guy that my mom grew up with in the 30s, a guy named Nicky. And he was my mom's best friend's brother. And they called him in Greek, Mickey Squiliki. And Squiliki in Greek means insect or bug or a wormy type of guy. And he was kind of wormy, and he was a gambler. And I remember, and I hadn't thought of Mickey in 30 years. I hadn't thought of the story in probably longer. I'm sitting at this bar, and out of the blue, the spooky part that Mailer talked about, I remember a story my mom said that Mickey was in San Francisco waiting to be deployed to the Pacific during World War II, and he got drunk and he got hit by a taxi. And his injuries were so bad that when he healed, he was never deployed. He was given a medical discharge and sent home. My mom was convinced that he did that on purpose, so to avoid going, to war. And like I said, the spooky art. I go, where did this come from? I go, that's perfect. I have a character that may have such a broken moral compass that he may have done this. Why would someone do that? He was drunk. Well, maybe he's an alcoholic. The writer says as he sits in a bar by himself drinking Four Roses bourbon. So that's where Bishop came from. Gia really was an offshoot of some criticism I got from the Lone Ranger novel Yesteryear. That novel, it had Fran and John Barrett, who played the original Lone Ranger on the radio for the first time in Buffalo. It was kind of their story. I wanted to write a story where Stryker was the Lone Ranger, and Barrett was Tonto. And it was kind of an adventure story about a man who wrote adventure stories. Well, one of the criticisms from that book was you don't have a strong female character here. And I thought, okay, you're right. You want a strong female character? I'll give you a strong female character. And I live in a part of town on the Lower West Side of Buffalo that was all through the 20th century was the Italian neighborhood. And I said, okay, this is where I live. It's not an Italian neighborhood anymore, but I'm going to give you a tough first generation woman, and she's going to be a handful. She is going to be tough because this was a tough neighborhood back then, and she's got to be tough because she wants to be a private eye. And the critics may find other things wrong with After Pearl, but I'll be damned if they say there's not a strong female character in this book. So that's where Gia came from.
And I said it before and I say it again. I absolutely love her. She's
More
great.
Gia, that's all I hear.
Absolutely. Did you have were you reluctant to write a female character? The whole discussion about as a man writing blah blah,
No, I did it with my first novel, Rook. That alternates points of view between Al Nussbaum, who was a true bank robber in the early 1960s, and his wife Lolly, who he left behind. So that novel, every chapter switches points of view between Al's story and Lolly's story, because now here's a woman in the early 1960s, just a high school degree. She had no idea her husband was a bank robber until she found money. And he has to go on the run and leave her behind with a infant, their first child, their only child. So I had that experience, but I'm also very lucky in that the writing group I'm in, I'm the only man. So I have four female novelists in my group. And when we share manuscripts, they'll say, "No, Steve, that's not right. A woman would never do that or say that or think that." And they go, and they say, "Hey, what do you call that type of dress? Or that hairstyle?" And so they're my secret weapon when it comes to writing female characters.
I have to tell you, I sometimes don't even know what female authors talk about when they write about dresses and hairstyle.
Yeah, but you know what? With writing a period piece, from the
Yeah.
40s, I wanted to get it right.
Yeah, of course.
Um,
Yeah.
with all the hairstyles and
Yeah.
the clothes and the drinks and all, because
Yeah.
that's a lot of fun for me, anyways. But yeah, writing female characters, I don't have any. Um, I don't have any hesitation anymore
Hmm.
about it. And
Hmm.
like I said, I've got these
Yeah.
four women behind me that have my back if I screw
Yeah.
up.
They are ruthless critics.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, and it makes for a good character you wrote.
Yep,
I mean, lucky you then.
absolutely. I am.
No, yeah, like I said, she's great. I mean, spin-off. And I mean, who would play Chia if you got a contract for a TV show? Who would
You
play
know,
her?
do you know that I get that question about Bishop? I get that question about Gia, and I don't know. I didn't have anyone in mind when I was writing either
Okay.
character. I have this feeling that if and I hope it happens. I hope Netflix calls. Um, but I think it might be just like this unknown or little known actress, and if she can pull it off, and if the script is written well enough, I think that would make her a instant star because she is such a
Mm,
strong character. But it would have
absolutely.
to be a special actress, I think.
Mm, maybe even a European one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm always stunned when you see an actor or actress on some show and they sound just like they're from the Midwest or they're from Texas. And then you
Yeah.
find out, it's an Irish actor or, um, uh, yeah, it may be somebody that's not known here in America that just, this will be their, U.S. breakthrough role. Um,
Yeah,
let's hope.
absolutely.
Let's hope.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I've touched a little bit upon that about the mob and the politicians in your story. I mean, this connection in a way, I mean, it's not surprising.
Yeah.
One often wonders about that. Um, what about the research in this regard? Because I
Well, it's
suppose there was a little bit of that in real
well, there
life.
There was a lot of it in real life, at least here in Buffalo. Buffalo was a big mob town. And I wrote about it in Yesteryear, and I wrote about it again in After Pearl. The Magdiano crime family ran this area for 40 years. Um, the cab companies, Van Dyke Cab, they were all mob. And the reason it started was because of prohibition, right? I live on the shores of Lake Erie. I can see Canada from my office window up on the third floor. So, in terms of running booze from Canada into the U.S., that's how they got their foothold. And they really spread out through, you know, even after prohibition ended. So the research is funny. There's a book, it's called Buffalo's Mobsters or something like that. And it's written by a man named Michael Rizzo, and I'm reading this book and I'm going, wait a minute, this is the same last name of the kids I went to high school with. Um, um, so there was a huge mob presence here, and so I relied on books like Rizzo's books and my own research from old newspapers, which I love going to the library and reading. So the presence of gangsters in a book set in the 30s, like Yesteryear, or the 40s, like After Pearl, in this town is more than likely could happen. So, and there, it was great fun to write. That's why you write crime fiction, so you can write all these shady and terrible people. So they have been in. Well, in my last two books, and then with the Bishop series, it will continue.
Hmm.
Um, but like I said, writing the mobsters, I said I can't just have one bad guy. I need four of them. So I named them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So they're known throughout the book as either the
Yeah,
evangelists,
just yeah.
so or the Gospels, the Gospel Brothers, they're called. So that was a lot of fun too, writing, making up those type of characters that were mob connected.
It was also fun to read because also the way Bishop can't distinguish two of them is
Yeah.
who cares? It's one
Yeah,
of them.
they're one and the same. They're all one and the same.
Yeah, yeah,
So even in a book, that deals with things like alcoholism and the war
yeah,
and Nazis, there's a lot of humor in the book, or at least I
yeah.
try to put it in.
Yep.
So it's a fun read, I think.
Yes, it
Um,
is.
and it helps people like Bishop a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
because he is funny. But if you go back and reread it, he uses humor a lot of different ways. He uses it
Mm. Yeah,
to be likable. He uses the humor because in noir fiction, there's always that wisecracking detective. But
yeah,
he also uses it to deflect a lot
yeah.
and hide a lot of his emotions.
Mm,
Um, so there's humor in the book, but it's used in different ways, and Bishop uses it
mm.
in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And also maybe to hide behind humor because of the sleazy part of his job, because
Yeah,
sitting, I don't know, in your car or even hide in the bushes and taking pictures of people who are
yeah,
betraying their spouses is,
yeah.
yeah,
And even Bishop doesn't like it.
yeah,
He doesn't like it. Another adultery case. He doesn't, but he has to because he's fallen so far,
yeah.
that he doesn't get the good cases. So a lot of the series, my thought for a lot of the series is trying to get Bishop back to where
Mm,
he was before page one, when he
mm,
was a pretty good detective.
mm,
In the book that comes out in 2027, that's called the Falling Woman. The running joke in that book is that Bishop is the sixth best detective in Buffalo. Um, so he's number six. He goes, well, it's better than being number seven. Um,
true.
yeah, so Bishop is trying to better himself in all the novels.
I mean, he has reason to, because we mentioned it before. There is Gia. He's secretly or not so secretly in love with her. Depends
Yeah,
on how you look at it. And even for her, he wants to be a better
yes,
person.
I think so, especially for her. And he's trying, and
Yeah.
Gia's not cutting him much of a break. She goes, okay,
Nope.
it's either you or the booze,
Yep.
and yeah,
Exactly.
and she's and she goes, if this doesn't work out, you're never going to see me again.
Yeah.
So she's
Exactly.
she's she's a tough one, for sure.
No
Um,
nonsense.
But yeah, no nonsense. That's a good way of describing her.
And that's what makes her so likable
Yeah.
for
Yep.
the female reader, I think, because she's not the kind of woman who says, "Oh, I'm going to love him and I be with him, and because my love will change him." No, change before that.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. She gives him an ultimatum.
Be worthy of my love.
That's right. Be worthy. That's right. And Bishop's trying. He's trying
Yes. Yes, he's absolutely trying, and that's what makes him so likable in the end. When you get to the
in
end
the
of the
end.
book, yeah, from not so likable to yes, you root
Yeah.
for him absolutely. In this book, yeah, yeah, his development is really, yeah. You made it. You did it.
Thanks. we
Absolutely. From a reader's point of view, I would say you did it. Absolutely. Steve, may I ask you, what would be your advice for any other aspiring author out there?
Oh, yeah, it's going to be nothing that they haven't heard before. But the biggest thing, I had this uh, a writing professor, Fred Lebron, and his quote, and I use it all the time, is writing is a game of attrition. Don't attrit. So don't quit, in other words. It took me 30 years to get my first book published, my short story collection called Muscle Cars. Um, and it was a long road of rejection and disappointment. But I didn't quit. I don't think I could quit. I know I can't because, I just wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, in high school. But the biggest thing is just don't quit because, um, if you quit, you're never going to find out if you could do it or not. And you never know when that manuscript's going to hit the right editor's desk at the right time, and it's going to happen. And like I said, hopefully it won't take 30 years for everyone out there to get published. But that was my long road to getting a book traditionally published. So don't quit. The other thing I would say is treat it like your job, because this is my real job. I just retired last month. Um, they always thought writing was my side gig, but my real job that paid the mortgage, that was my side gig. I was getting up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to write. That was my real job. But you have to treat it like it's your occupation. You show up every day, show up ready to work, show up on time. Um, how's the muse going to find you if you're not at your desk at that time? She may come and you're not sleeping in. She's going to someone else's house. So treat it like a job. Treat it seriously, and be part of the writing community. Which it took me a long time to learn that, but go to the local readings, go when authors come to town, support indie bookstores. You hear these authors say, oh, my local indie bookstore is not carrying my book. And I said, well, do you support them? Do you go and buy books there? Do they know you by name when you walk in the door? Because if they do, they're going to carry a copy or two on the shelf. So treat it like you're a professional, even if you haven't been paid yet.
Be generous with your time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And as far as I know, the writing community is very generous.
They are, because we're all in the same boat, and we're all trying to get there, and we're willing to help each other. And it's great when one of us has a success and everyone celebrates it. And if I can extend a helping hand, I do that, because I know a lot of hands have been extended to me over the last 30 years for me to get to this point.
Yeah. And may I ask again about your plans for the future? What can we expect? You said book number 2 will be out in 2027.
Yeah, May of 2027. It's the second in the Nicholas Bishop mysteries. That title is called The Falling Woman. And we're going through the edits right now. So at the beginning of July, I turned in my the latest revision, and I'm waiting to get that back to see how much more work has to be done. Hopefully that will be wrapped up. So I'm already researching and have about 25 pages of the third bishop's story. Again, I always have to have a title to it. So right now it's called The Fifth Rose. I'm working on that. And then I also have a book I'm taking notes on and outlining that I'm writing with my cousin, and it's a boxing novel. So who knows when that will come out? I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, because my cousin came to me with basically a first draft. And so now I have to learn these characters that didn't come out of my head. I have to learn their motivations and come up with their backstories. And that's going to be a challenge, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And who knows, now that I'm retired, maybe I'll try writing 2 novels at the same time. I don't know if I can pull that off or have the energy to do that. But I think I might give that a shot if I can get my act together.
It's good to know. So I'm looking forward to more from Bishop and Gia.
Yeah. There'll be plenty of Gia, I promise.
Yep. Good. The more the better. It's nothing against Bishop. Like I said, he's likable in the end, but Gia. Stephen, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know then?
I would just like them to check out my website. It's SG and then my last name, EOANNOU.com. And if anyone's interested in anything about me or my books, it's a pretty thorough website, but I always tell people that the last page is the most important page, because that's the contact page. And I love to hear from readers. I love to hear from Netflix, but I like hearing from readers. Drop me a note. I respond to everything. Tell me good or bad, what you thought of my work or my books or even this interview. I love to hear from readers because writing is so solitary that a lot of times we don't, unless we're doing an appearance or a signing, we don't get that opportunity to have a conversation. And so I would just encourage people, check out the website and then drop me a line.
Yep. And read the book.
And read the book. Don't give up ambition.
Nope. Don't do that. Don't give up, because you will regret it if you give up on him. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Stephen, it was such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
We got through it.
Yes, we did. Absolutely. Thank you for being here, and please wait for me in the green room. I will be with you shortly.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
Dear listeners, I do hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I do hope you will tune in for another episode. Until next time.